the Deathworlder Armada responded to an alien SOS no one else answered. Part 1. The signal no one wanted. The signal came in at 0300 hours station time. It was weak, broken, and full of static. It had been bouncing across relay stations for 11 days before it finally landed at Outpost Harlan, a small human deep space station sitting at the very edge of Confederacy territory, so far from the center of things that most people forgot it existed. The outpost was not pretty. It smelled like recycled air and old coffee. The walls had scratches on them that nobody had ever bothered to fix. But it had good sensors, a strong antenna array, and a crew that actually paid attention to things. Lieutenant Nora Calloway was the one who caught it first. She was sitting at the communications console halfway through a cold cup of tea, and when the signal came through and triggered a soft alert on her screen. She leaned forward, pulled her headset on, and listened. The voice in the signal was not human. It was high and tonal, almost musical, rising and falling in a way that sounded more like a melody than a language. The translation system took a few seconds to catch up. When it did, Nora sat very still. She ran it again, twice. Then she printed a hard copy, stood up, and walked down the corridor to Commander Dale Hurst's office. Dale was awake. He was almost always awake at odd hours. It was not insomnia exactly, more like a habit he had never been able to shake after 20 years in deep space service. He was sitting at his desk with a half-eaten meal beside him and a systems report open on his screen that he was clearly not reading. And he looked up when Nora knocked on the open door. She handed him the printout without saying anything. He read it slowly. He had a way of reading things that made it look like he was having a quiet conversation with the page. When he finished, he set it down and looked at her. "How many Confederacy fleets received this?" he asked. "All of them," Nora said. 14 separate relay stations confirmed receipt. The signal hit the Travan fleet, the Orath Council ships, the Gilean Defense Group, the Sudari patrol wings, all of them. "And how many responded?" Nora's expression did not change, but something in her voice went flat. "0. Dale looked at the printout again. The message was simple. A Velthari colony on a moon called Mireth 7, located inside the Velthari exclusion zone, was under attack. And the Kreth, an insectoid empire that operated on the edge of known space and had a long history of seizing planets and moons by force, had surrounded the colony with siege platforms. Bombardment had begun. There were approximately 400,000 Velthari civilians on that moon. Farmers, elders, children. The signal asked for help from anyone who would listen. Nobody had listened. The exclusion zone was not a mystery. Every species in the Confederacy knew the history. The Velthari had been in conflict with the Kreth for decades. The Confederacy had quietly agreed to classify the region as a no-interference zone years ago, which was a polite way of saying that nobody wanted to get involved in a war they had not started and could not easily win. The Kreth were not members of the Confederacy, but they were powerful enough that provoking them without a very good reason was considered politically unwise. 400,000 lives, apparently, was not a good enough reason. Not for anyone except the humans. Dale stood up, stretched his back, and walked to the window. Outside, the stars were the same as always, cold, distant, indifferent. He had grown up in a small town in Kansas where the sky went on forever, and he had spent his whole life looking up at it. He never got tired of it. He also never forgot that what looked peaceful from a distance could be burning up close. He turned back to Nora. "Get me Captain Greg Albright on the Resolute, tight beam, encrypted." Nora nodded and left. Dale picked up the printout again and read the last line of the translated message. It said, simply, "We are dying, and no one is coming." He folded the paper and put it in his chest pocket. The UES Resolute was a carrier vessel, large, old, and heavily modified over its years of service. It was not supposed to be in this sector, technically. The Confederacy had raised eyebrows more than once about the quiet presence of human warships near the Outer Rim, but the humans had always filed the correct paperwork and pointed to the correct clauses in the correct agreements, and eventually the Confederacy had stopped asking. The Resolute was currently sitting 3 light hours from Outpost Harlan, running a routine patrol with a group of 14 other ships. Captain Greg Albright answered the call within 2 minutes of it going through. But he was a broad-shouldered man with short gray hair and a face that looked like it had seen a great deal without being particularly surprised by any of it. He read the signal transcript on his end while Dale waited. "That's the exclusion zone," Greg said when he finished. "Yes," Dale said. "The Confederacy flagged it and did nothing." "Correct." Greg was quiet for a moment. In the background of his feed, Dale could hear the ambient sounds of a warship at rest, the low hum of engines, the distant clatter of a crew going about its work. Normal sounds, sounds of a ship that was about to be anything but normal. "How long since bombardment started?" Greg asked. 11 days since the signal was sent. Actual bombardment status is unknown, but based on Kreth tactical doctrine, they would have begun surface strikes within the first 72 hours of encirclement. Greg absorbed that. He did not curse or raise his voice. He rarely did. "What are we working with on their end?" 17 Kreth siege platforms confirmed by the signal. Possibly more by now. Their dreadnought support is unknown. "And on our end?" Dale gave him the count. The Resolute and her group totaled 15 vessels, including 2 carrier platforms, a pair of heavy cruisers, 4 destroyers, 4 frigates, and a supply tender that everyone called Old Penny because she was the oldest ship in active human service and refused to stop functioning no matter what happened to her. Greg did not hesitate. "Get the group ready. We move in 4 hours." Dale felt something settle in his chest. Not excitement, not fear, but something older and simpler, purpose. "Understood. I'll coordinate from here until I can get a shuttle to you." "Dale," Greg said before the channel closed. "Yeah." "Tell Nora good catch." Dale almost smiled. "I will." He closed the channel, walked back to his desk, and started making calls. There were logistics to arrange, fuel calculations to run, a medical team to brief, and about 40 things that needed to happen before the fleet could move. He worked through all of them with the same quiet focus he brought to everything, not rushing, not panicking, just working. At no point did he contact the Confederacy to ask for permission. Nora, back at her console, watched the outpost come to life around her. Lights came on in sections that had been dark for weeks. Crew members who had been asleep showed up in corridors. I'm still pulling on jackets, asking questions. The answer moving through the station was always the same. We received a distress call, and we are going. She pulled up the Mireth system on her navigation screen and studied it. A small moon orbiting a brown gas giant, far from anything. Unremarkable. The kind of place that existed in the galaxy by the billions and was noticed by almost nobody. Except tonight, somebody had noticed. She finished her cold tea, straightened her headset, and got back to work. The Deathworlder Armada responded to an alien SOS no one else answered. Part 2. What Deathworlders Do. The Mireth system looked quiet from a distance. That was the first thing Lieutenant Commander Priya Vasquez noticed when the fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel and the main screen filled with stars. For one brief second, and the system looked like any other. A dim gas giant, a pale moon, a handful of small rocky bodies floating in the dark. Ordinary. Calm. Then the sensors updated, and the calm disappeared. 17 red markers appeared on the tactical display, arranged in a wide ring around the moon called Mireth 7. Each marker represented a Kreth siege platform, a flat, ugly vessel built for one purpose and nothing else. Beneath them, the moon's northern continent showed heat signatures that did not belong to any natural geological event. Things were burning down there. Had been burning for days. Priya turned to Captain Greg Albright. 17 confirmed. Sensors are picking up smaller escort craft around each platform. And we're looking at roughly 60 additional vessels when you count them in. Greg stood at the center of the bridge with his hands clasped behind his back, looking at the display. He did not look alarmed. He looked like a man doing arithmetic. "Get the pilots up," he said. The Resolute came alive in a way that only a carrier could. Deep in the ship's belly, flight crews sprinted across the hangar deck, pulling equipment, running final checks, shouting to each other over the noise of engines spooling up. 40 fighters in various states of readiness began their launch sequences. The hangar smelled like fuel and metal, and the particular sharp tension that filled a room when people were getting ready to do something dangerous and knew it. Lieutenant Corey Dunn was the first pilot strapped into his cockpit. He was 29 years old, and from a small city in North Carolina. And he had been flying fighters for 7 years. He was not the most decorated pilot on the ship. He was, however, the one who always went first, which his squadron had long since accepted as simply a fact about him, like the way he always burned his toast. He ran through his checklist at speed, hands moving from switch to switch without needing to look. Around him, the rest of his 8-ship wing was doing the same. Through his cockpit glass, he could see the great hangar doors sliding open ahead, revealing the black of space and the distant glint of Kreth platforms catching the system's weak sunlight. The Kreth responded almost immediately to the fleet's arrival. A broadcast came through on the open channel, 6 languages in sequence, the same message in each. And the translation was short. "This system is under Kreth dominion. All foreign vessels must withdraw immediately. Failure to comply will result in engagement." In Confederacy space, that message had never been ignored. Corey's radio crackled. Greg's voice came through, calm as weather. "All wings, you are cleared for launch. Strike pattern Delta. First priority is platform shields. Second priority is their escort craft. Do not let them reposition." Corey clicked his radio twice to confirm. Then he pushed the throttle forward and flew out of the ship. The first wave hit the 3 nearest platforms before their point defense systems had fully tracked the incoming strike. It was not a glorious charge. It was fast, low, and deliberate. The kind of attack built not on bravery alone, but on timing and the understanding that the first few seconds of an engagement were the most valuable. Corey's wing punched through the outer screen of escort craft, took fire from 2 directions at once, and kept moving. The destroyer UES Harlow moved up to support, drawing fire from a platform's main guns while the fighters worked its shield generators. The UES Carver, a frigate on the fleet's port side, took a direct hit to its engine section during the second exchange and began trailing debris. Its captain, a woman named Lieutenant Commander Diana Cole, rerouted power to the forward guns and kept firing. In the medical bay, Corpsman Sandra Osei was already working. The 3 crew members from the Carver's engine room had been brought aboard the Resolute by emergency shuttle within minutes of the hit. 2 of them were badly burned. Sandra moved between them with the focused calm of someone who had trained for exactly this kind of chaos. Not because chaos felt comfortable, but because she had decided long ago that when things went wrong, she was going to be the thing that went right. She worked through her entire emergency kit in under 40 minutes. On the bridge, Priya tracked the battle in real time. The numbers were not good in the traditional sense. The humans were outgunned and outnumbered, and every exchange cost something. But the Kreth, she noticed, were reacting rather than acting. Their formation had been built to handle a siege, not a fight. They were slow to reposition. And their escort craft were fast, but not particularly creative. They expected the humans to follow predictable attack patterns, and the humans were not doing that. This was something Priya had thought about often. She had studied xeno-military history as part of her training, and one thing that came up again and again was the confusion that other species experienced when they fought humans for the first time. It was not that humans were physically superior. They were not compared to many species in the galaxy. It was something harder to define, a willingness to take hits and keep moving, a habit of making decisions under pressure that should not have worked and sometimes did anyway, an almost irrational refusal to recognize when a situation was hopeless. Earth had built that into them. 40,000 years of surviving a planet that had genuinely actively tried to kill them at every stage of their development. Weather that could flatten cities, diseases that could empty continents, predators that were bigger, faster, and better armed. The species that came out the other side of all that was not gentle, not cautious, and not easily discouraged. The Kreth were learning this now. By the third hour of fighting, 4 of the 17 platforms had been destroyed and 3 more were badly damaged. The human fleet had taken hits across 7 ships. Old Penny, the supply tender, had somehow acquired a scorched gash along her port side that the crew was already welding shut while the battle was still going on. Because Old Penny's crew were exactly the kind of people you would expect on a ship like that. But Corey landed his fighter for a fast rearm and refuel, swapped out a cracked helmet visor in 90 seconds, and launched again. At the 6-hour mark, 11 of the 17 Kreth platforms were gone, retreating or drifting. The remaining 6 pulled back to the far edge of the system and held position. The Kreth broadcast did not come again. There was just silence on the open channel, the heavy, uncertain kind of silence that meant someone was watching and thinking. Greg stood at the viewport and looked at the 6 distant red markers on the display. He did not relax. In his experience, an enemy that stopped and watched was an enemy that was planning something. He turned to Priya. "Get a landing team ready. We need people on that moon." Priya was already moving. "Marines are suited and staged. Medical team is ready. Doctor." Maddox says she can have a field unit operational within an hour of landing. "Tell her to make it 45 minutes. "Yes, sir." Greg looked back at the viewport. The moon was there, pale and scarred, sitting quiet beneath the aftermath of days of bombardment. Somewhere down on that surface, 400,000 people were still alive and waiting. They had sent a signal out into the dark, and nobody had come. Until now. He opened the ship-wide channel. His voice went out to every person on every ship in the group, engineers, pilots, medics, gunners, cooks, and everyone else. He did not make a speech. He was not that kind of captain. He said, "Good work. We're not done. Oh, let's go get them." That was enough. The Deathworlder Armada responded to an alien SOS no one else answered. Part 3. The people they came for the landing craft hit the moon's atmosphere at a steep angle and came down fast. Inside, the landing team sat in 2 rows facing each other. 12 Marines in light armor, 4 medical personnel, a pair of engineers, and Chief Petty Officer Leonard Greer, who was technically there in a support capacity, but had a way of becoming the center of any room he entered simply by being himself. Leonard was a big man, quiet by habit, from a small town in rural Ohio. He had large hands that were equally comfortable fixing a broken pipe or carrying an injured person, and a general air of steadiness that people tended to find reassuring in uncertain situations. Then he looked out the small porthole as the craft broke through the cloud cover and the surface of Mireth 7 came into view. It was not good. The northern continent, which had been the main settlement area according to the colony maps, was marked by long dark lines where the Kreth bombardment had carved through farmland and buildings. Several areas were still smoldering. The southern regions had fared better. The Kreth had focused their strikes on population centers first, as they always did, and the southernmost colony clusters had been the last to be hit. That was where the largest group of survivors had gathered. The craft set down in a flat open field outside a low cluster of buildings that the Velthari used as a communal center. As soon as the ramp came down, Leonard was hit by the smell of the place, smoke, earth, by something faintly sweet that he could not identify. and beneath all of it the unmistakable smell of a place where a great number of people had been living in close quarters under stress for many days. The Velthari were already there, watching from a distance. They were tall, most of them a full head taller than Leonard, which was not common. Their skin was pale, almost white, with faint patterns running along their necks and arms that shifted slightly when they moved, like the shadows of leaves. Their eyes were large and dark, set wide in long, narrow faces. They moved carefully, deliberately, as though every step was considered. And they were completely silent. Leonard had read the briefing notes on the Velthari. Their primary communication was tonal, a language built on rising and falling sounds, almost like singing. And their secondary channel was low-frequency vibration, transmitted through the ground, which humans could not hear or feel. The translation device on his belt would handle the spoken parts. The rest, he figured, he would have to work out as he went. He stepped forward, away from the landing craft, and stopped about 10 meters from the nearest group of Velthari. He kept his hands visible and his posture open. Behind him, the medical team was already unloading equipment, moving with quiet efficiency. The Velthari watched. Then one of them stepped forward. She was older than the others. You could tell by the way her patterns had deepened and the slight slowness in her movement. A kind of deliberateness that came not from weakness, but from having moved through the world for a very long time. And the translation system identified her rank as speaker. Her name, rendered into something pronounceable, came out as Velorath. She stopped 2 meters from Leonard and studied him with those wide, dark eyes. She looked at him the way a person looks at something they have never seen before and are trying to understand from first principles. Then she made a sound. Long, low, questioning. The device on Leonard's belt translated it after a pause. "Why did you come?" Leonard thought about it. He was not a man who filled silence with words, and he was not going to start now. He thought about the signal, about Dale reading it at his desk at 3 in the morning, about Corey going out first in his fighter, about Sandra working through her kit in 40 minutes. But he thought about all the relay stations that had received the signal and filed it away and gone back to their routines. He said, "You asked." The device translated. Velorath was still for a long moment, then something shifted in her. Not in her face, which remained composed, but in her posture, the angle of her head, the way she held her hands. It was subtle enough that Leonard might have missed it if he had not been paying attention. He had spent 20 years in deep space service and had learned that body language was often the most honest part of any conversation. What he read in her, in that moment, was something between disbelief and grief. As though the answer was so simple that it had never occurred to her, and now that it had, something that had been locked up for a long time was trying to come loose. And she said something else. The device took a moment. "No one else came." "No," Leonard said, "but we did." Behind him, Dr. Claire Maddox had set up the first field station in the large communal building and was already meeting with a group of Velthari who had been guiding the injured toward the entrance. Claire was a small woman with quick eyes and the particular kind of energy that surgeons sometimes develop. Not frantic, but constantly in motion, always 3 steps ahead of the current moment. She did not know Velthari anatomy. What she knew was that injured beings needed certain things in common regardless of species: fluids, clean environments, warmth, and the belief that someone was working on the problem. She started there. Her medic, Sergeant Owen Price, worked beside her and asked questions constantly, not out of uncertainty, but because he understood that asking questions was the fastest way to learn what he needed to know. The Velthari medical workers who stayed to help him communicated partly through the translation device and partly through gestures, and Owen matched them, gesture for gesture, until something like a working language developed between them within the hour. In the southern settlement cluster, Leonard and 2 Marines walked through the buildings with Velorath. She showed him what the bombardment had done. There were places where walls had simply stopped existing. There were gaps in the ground that had not been there before. There were quiet rooms where people sat very close together in the way that beings of all kinds sit when they are trying to take up as little space as possible and wait for something terrible to be over. And he did not know how to feel about what he was seeing, so he did what he always did. He focused on what he could do about it. He got on the radio and gave Greg a full damage assessment. He requested 2 more medical units, additional food supplies, a water purification kit, and a portable generator for the clinic Claire was building. He spoke in the flat, clear voice of someone who had moved past the emotional reaction and arrived at the practical one. Greg sent everything within the hour. By nightfall on Mireth 7, the field hospital had treated over 300 patients. The southern settlements had power, clean water, and enough food to last the population several days. Leonard had walked every accessible section of the colony and cataloged the damage. Vel-Orath had walked beside him for most of it. He sometimes speaking through the device, sometimes just walking in silence. Near the end of the evening, she said, "Your people are strange." Leonard glanced at her. "How do you mean?" "You work like you are afraid of stopping," she said, "but you do not seem afraid of anything else." He considered that. "We're afraid of plenty," he said. "We just don't let it make the decisions." Vel-Orath made a low sound that the device did not translate, which Leonard had started to suspect was the Velthari equivalent of a thoughtful pause. Then she said, "I sent that signal because I did not know what else to do. I did not believe anyone would answer." "A lot of people didn't," Leonard agreed. "But you did." "We did." She stopped walking and looked up at the sky. Through the smoke and the thin atmosphere of the moon, a few stars were visible. Somewhere up there, 15 human ships were sitting between this moon and the people who had been trying to destroy it. She said something quiet. The device translated it slowly, as though the words were difficult to carry across the gap between their languages. It came out as, "I will remember this." Leonard looked up at the same sky. "So will we," he said. Overhead, unseen but close, the Resolute held its position, its lights moving steadily across the dark. The Deathworlder Armada responded to an alien SOS no one else. Answered. Part 4. The price of answering. The 6 Kreth platforms had not moved for 16 hours. Priya had been watching them on the tactical display for every one of those hours. The sleeping in short intervals in the chair beside her station and waking up to check the same 6 red markers sitting at the edge of the system. They did not advance. They did not retreat. They simply waited, and the waiting was starting to feel more deliberate than passive. She was on her 4th cup of coffee when the sensors picked up the jump signatures. "Captain," she said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. Greg was beside her in seconds. He looked at the display, and the display was not good. 23 new Kreth vessels had just dropped into the system. They came in from 2 directions at once, spreading across the sensor screen in a wide arc that was clearly designed to prevent any easy exit. And among them, identified by their mass readings and energy signatures, there were 2 Kreth dreadnoughts, vessels so large that the Resolute's hull would have fit inside either one of them with room to spare. The 6 waiting platforms began moving immediately, rejoining the main formation. Now the Kreth had 23 ships, plus 17 platforms. The humans had 15 ships, a supply tender, and whatever was left in the fighter bays after 2 combat cycles. Priya did the math 3 times, in 3 different ways, looking for an angle she had missed. She did not find one. There was no combination of their available forces that won this engagement on even terms. The Kreth could simply absorb whatever the human fleet threw at them and still have enough left over to finish what they had started on Mireth 7. Greg was quiet for a long moment. His face was still. Around them, the bridge crew worked in low, focused voices, running their own calculations, updating their own systems, each person doing their job with the kind of careful attention that people bring to things when they understand the stakes clearly. Then Nora's voice came through the channel from Outpost Harlan. "Commander Hurst has a transmission for the bridge," she said. "Priority 1. Dale's face appeared on the screen. He was on a shuttle, judging by the background. He had left the outpost and was making his way to the Resolute. His expression was the same as always, calm, focused, and carrying somewhere underneath it a weight that he did not put down, but also did not let show. "I see your sensor feed," he said. "I've been on the line with Fleet Command for the last 2 hours. 2 battle groups are being dispatched. The UESS Covenant is leading the response." Greg absorbed this. "Arrival time? 19 hours. Nobody on the bridge said anything. Greg looked at the tactical display. The Kreth formation was tightening. They were not attacking yet. They were arranging themselves, which in Kreth tactical doctrine meant they were preparing for a comprehensive strike rather than a scattered one. They would hit everything at once. The fleet, the moon, and anything in between. 19 hours was a long time. "Dale," Greg said. "Yeah, we'll be here." Dale looked at him through the screen with the expression of a man who understood exactly what that meant and was not going to insult the moment by arguing against it. "I know," he said. "I'll be there in 4 hours. Don't finish this without me." The channel closed. Greg straightened up, turned to face the bridge and spoke clearly. "All ships, all crews. We have Confederacy reinforcements coming in 19 hours. Our job until then is simple. Nothing gets to that moon. We form up and we hold the line. That is the whole mission." He paused. "Get everyone ready." The fleet arranged itself into a blocking formation between the Kreth Armada and Mireth 7. It was not an aggressive posture. It was a wall. The ships spread across the likely approach vectors, shields at full extension. Weapons systems live, engines burning to maintain position. Old Penny, the supply tender, was positioned at the rear, shuttling ammunition and repair materials between ships at a pace that her aging systems were not technically rated to maintain. Her crew did it anyway. The Kreth opened fire 40 minutes later. What followed was not a battle in the traditional sense. It was an endurance contest. The Kreth pushed forward in waves, and the human ships pushed back, and the line held, and then the Kreth pushed again, and the line held again. Ships took damage. Systems failed and were rerouted. Hull breaches were sealed by crew members working in suits on the outside of the ships, while weapons fire went past them, because the breach had to be sealed, and someone had to do it. Corey Dunn flew 4 sorties in the first 6 hours. He landed between each one for a fast rearm, climbed back into his cockpit while the ground crew worked around him, and went back out. By the 3rd sortie, his hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear, he told himself, but from the accumulated physical toll of high-G maneuvering over hours of combat. On the 4th sortie, his wing took a hit that knocked out 2 fighters and left him flying with only 5 pilots behind him instead of 7. He reported it, got confirmation, and kept flying. On the Carver, Diana Cole was managing a ship that was technically supposed to be mission-limited due to engine damage, but was not acting that way. Her engineering team had rigged a partial repair using components that were not strictly meant for the purpose, and the patched engine was running at 60% capacity, which was 60% more than 0. The Carver stayed in the line, and Diana stayed in her chair, and the ship kept firing. Sandra Osei worked without stopping. Crew members came to the medical bay in a steady stream. Burns, concussions, fractures, lacerations from hull shrapnel, the one case of oxygen deprivation that required careful monitoring for 3 hours. She triaged, treated, and moved to the next one, and the one after that, and the one after that. At some point, someone put a food packet and a water bottle on the edge of her station, and she ate and drank without looking up from what she was doing. The hours passed in the way that hard hours always pass. Slowly when you are in them, and all at once when you look back. On the surface of Myreth 7, the evacuation was underway. Leonard had organized the colony's population into groups and was moving them toward the landing zones using a combination of the colony's own transport vehicles and shuttles from the fleet. He worked with the same flat efficiency he brought to everything, but even he had slowed his pace slightly near the 9th hour, not because he was tired, but because a group of Veltari children had gathered near the edge of the field and were watching the sky. They were watching the flashes above. Every few minutes, there was a distant bloom of light high in the atmosphere where something had fired or been hit. One of them, very small, coming barely past Leonard's knee, tugged his sleeve and made a sound. The translation device rendered it as a question. "Are they safe up there?" Leonard looked at the sky. He thought about Corey in his cockpit, about Diana on the Carver, about Priya on the Resolute Bridge running numbers over and over looking for any edge she could find. He looked down at the child. "They're doing their job," he said. "That's what they do." He did not say yes, but he did not say no. And something in the way he said it seemed to settle the child, who let go of his sleeve and looked back at the sky with an expression that, even across the gap of two entirely different species, looked very much like trust. On the Resolute Bridge, at the 17-hour mark, Priya looked at the tactical display and said, "They're pushing harder." The Kreth formation was compressing. They had taken losses. The human fleet had not spent 17 hours sitting still, but they had taken fewer than the humans, and they knew it. The blocking formation was still holding, but barely. 2 ships were running on emergency power. The Harlow had lost its port gun array. 3 fighters had not come back from the last sortie. Greg stood at the display and looked at everything at once. His jaw was tight. His eyes were clear. He said, 2 more hours, and then he said nothing else, and the fleet kept fighting. The Deathworlder Armada responded to an alien SOS no one else answered. Part 5, What the Galaxy Learned. The UESS Covenant arrived with 17 minutes to spare. It came out of faster-than-light travel, like something the universe had been holding back and finally released. A warship so large that the first thing the Kreth sensors picked up was its mass reading, which was greater than every human ship in the current engagement combined. Behind it came the 2 battle groups, 31 additional vessels fanning out across the system in a formation that was not rushed or showy, but was very clearly designed to cover every direction at once. On the Resolute's bridge, Priya saw the new contacts appear on her screen, to check the identification codes, and let out a long breath that she had been holding for approximately 19 hours. "Fleet Command, this is UES Resolute," she said into the channel. "Welcome to Myreth." The response came back in a steady voice from the Covenant's bridge. "We see you, Resolute. Looks like you've been busy." "A little," she said. The effect on the Kreth formation was visible almost immediately. The tight, aggressive push they had been maintaining for the last 2 hours began to shift. Vessels that had been moving forward started to slow. The dreadnoughts, which had been the most dangerous elements of the Kreth force, repositioned themselves in a way that was clearly defensive rather than offensive. The Kreth were not running yet, but they were reassessing. Greg watched them from the viewport. He looked tired in the honest, physical way of someone who had been awake for a very long time and had spent most of that time under pressure. But his eyes were still sharp, still watching. The Kreth commander sent a transmission. It was short and in their own language, and when the translation came through, it said that the Kreth Dominion was withdrawing under protest and reserved the right to return under the Conquest Doctrine. Greg's response was 4 words. "Then do not return." The Kreth withdrew. It was not a fast withdrawal, and it was not clean. It took several hours for the full formation to pull back and jump out of the system, and during that time, both fleets sat in careful silence, watching each other move. Nobody fired. Nobody pushed. The humans held their position and let the Kreth leave. That which in some ways was its own kind of statement. We are not chasing you. We are not afraid of you leaving. We simply needed you gone. And now you are. When the last Kreth vessel disappeared from the sensor screen, the Resolute's bridge went very quiet. And then Priya started laughing. Not a wild or hysterical laugh, but a tired, genuine, slightly disbelieving laugh that lasted about 5 seconds before she got herself back together. A few other crew members laughed too. Greg looked at all of them with something that was almost a smile, and then he sat down in his captain's chair for the first time in 19 hours. Dale arrived by shuttle shortly after. He walked onto the bridge looking like a man who had been awake on a shuttle for 4 hours after being awake at a desk for the 20 before that, which was exactly what he was. Greg looked at him. "You missed the end," Greg said. "I saw the feed," Dale said. "Good work." "The whole fleet," Greg said. "Not me." Dale nodded. That was the thing about Greg. He was incapable of taking credit that he did not feel belonged to him alone. On the surface of Mireth 7, Leonard Greer got the news from a crewman who ran across the field to tell him. He was in the middle of helping load a group of injured Velthari onto a shuttle at the time, and he listened to the message, said good, and went back to what he was doing. Velorath, standing nearby, watched him with those wide, dark eyes. "It is over?" she asked. "The immediate threat is over," Leonard said carefully. "There's more work to do." She considered that. But the Kreth are gone." "For now." She made the low sound he had started to associate with deep thought. Then she said, "Come. I want to show you something." She led him to the center of the main settlement. The place that had been a community gathering space before the bombardment had taken apart a section of the roof and left a long crack in the floor. People were already there, clearing debris, carrying pieces of what had been walls and furniture out through the wide doors. Children were helping. Old Velthari who moved slowly were helping. Everyone who could stand was doing something. Leonard stood at the entrance and watched. "We always rebuild," Velorath said. "It is the first thing we do when the danger is past. We do not wait to feel safe. We start building and the safety comes after." Leonard watched a young Velthari carefully sweep a pile of broken material into a container that a smaller one was holding steady. "That sounds familiar," he said. She looked at him. "Humans do this too?" "Every single time," he said. The formal meeting between the human commanders and Velorath took place 2 days later, aboard the Resolute. It was not a ceremony in any traditional sense. The Velthari did not have one for this kind of occasion, because nothing like this occasion had ever happened before. Greg sat across a table from Velorath, with Dale beside him and a translator between them, and they talked for 3 hours about what had happened and what came next. Velorath asked again what the humans wanted in return, that Greg thought about it the same way Leonard had thought about his own version of the question. Honestly, without trying to make the answer sound better than it was. "Nothing," he said. "We want your colony to be safe. We want the Kreth to understand that what they did here has a cost. That's it." Velorath was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Other species will hear about this. About what your people did here." "Maybe," Greg said. "They will not understand it," she said. "Most of them will look for the reason underneath the reason. The political calculation, the resource interest, the strategic advantage. They will not believe that you came simply because we asked." Greg did not disagree with her. He understood how other species thought about these things because humans had studied the galaxy carefully for a long time. And he also understood that what the Velthari were experiencing, this confusion, this almost reluctant gratitude, was not unusual. It was something humans encountered again and again. The galaxy was old and careful and had learned to think of generosity as a transaction and of help as a price to be named later. Earth had never fully learned that lesson. Dale thought it was because the planet had been too busy trying to kill them for them to develop the patience for long political games. "Let them wonder," Dale said quietly. "The explanation won't make sense to them anyway." The Confederacy reacted as expected. There were 3 emergency sessions. High Arbiter Ys Tholen filed a formal inquiry about the human presence in the exclusion zone. Several member species issued statements expressing concern about unilateral action. And the diplomatic language was careful and circular and ultimately said very little, which was its purpose. Dale attended every session by holographic link, patient and polite, answering every question with the same measured tone. He never raised his voice. He never pointed out the obvious. He let the process move at the pace it wanted to move, because he had learned long ago that some things could not be rushed and some victories were better left quiet. In the end, the Confederacy issued a resolution that acknowledged the outcome, carefully avoided praising the method, and quietly shelved the inquiry. Nobody was entirely happy with it. Nobody was entirely unhappy. It was the kind of result that large bureaucracies produced when reality had already outpaced their ability to object to it. And the Velthari sent a single communication to Earth 3 weeks later. It was not addressed to a government office or a fleet command. It was addressed to Outpost Harlan. It was addressed to Nora. She had been on duty alone at 0300, same as the night the first signal came in. She almost missed the alert the same way she had almost missed it before, and then she saw it, and she pulled on her headset and she listened. The message was short. It said that the Velthari people remembered, and that they would not forget, and that if there ever came a day when the humans sent a signal into the dark and needed someone to answer it, the Velthari would come. Nora sat with that for a moment. Then she printed the message, stood up, and walked down the corridor to Dale's office. He was awake. He was almost always awake. She handed him the printout. He read it slowly. When he looked up, his expression was the same as always, except for something small and quiet in his eyes that was not there very often. He folded the paper and put it in his chest pocket, beside the one he had never taken out. Back at her console, Nora noticed a new set of incoming signals that had arrived in the last few hours. Not 1, not 2. 6 separate distress calls, all from the outer edges of known space. Places that had no particular history with humanity, no political alliance, no reason to reach out, except that the signals were all aimed at human receivers. Not Confederacy relay stations, not the broad general broadcast frequency. They were aimed specifically and precisely at Outpost Harlan. Nora looked at the signals for a long time, and then she flagged them for Dale and wrote one note in the margin of each file. The note said, "Someone heard we answer." She straightened her headset, finished the last of her tea, and got back to work.